After giving birth to her son, my daughter replaced her stepfather with her biological father. Then she named her child after him. I warned her, your stepfather built this business for you. She just scoffed, what am I supposed to do with a poultry farm? Smell like chicken feed for the rest of my life. But when she needed her stepfather, he was already gone. When my daughter Emily called me to say she'd had the baby, I expected to feel a wave of joy, maybe even a little relief. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. I want you to meet him, she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Before anyone else does. Of course, sweetheart, I replied, feeling a warmth bloom in my chest. Your stepfather will be so excited. No, Mom, she cut in. Not him. I meant Michael. My biological father. Her words hung in the air, a thin wire strung tight between us, ready to snap. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, hoping I'd misheard, but the silence on the line only sharpened the truth. Michael. The man who walked away before Emily ever took her first breath. The man who had been a ghost through all the scraped knees, first dances, and graduation ceremonies. And yet, here he was, being offered a place at the start of her child's life, the spot I had always thought was reserved for Frank, the man who had raised her. My heart twisted painfully, picturing Frank's face when he found out. His gentle eyes, always a little tired from the long days at the poultry farm, but endlessly kind. The same man who had worked himself to the bone, who smelled perpetually of feathers and feed, who had never complained once when Emily needed anything: tuition, a car, a place to stay after college. But Frank wasn't Michael. Michael, with his polished charm and stories of a life that glittered from a distance. Michael, who had popped back into our world just as Emily was starting to carve a new life for herself, just as Frank had signed over part of the farm to her, hoping it would help her find stability. Emily, I began, my voice quivering, have you told Frank? There was a pause and I could hear the soft rustle of blankets, the sleepy coo of the newborn in her arms. Not yet, she admitted. I thought it might be better if I told him after. Once everything is settled. Settled? Like the tiny, perfect name she'd already chosen, Michael Jr. She hadn't told me, but I had seen the name etched in gold on the crib in the background of a photo she'd sent earlier. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just inviting her biological father into this sacred moment. She was immortalizing him, giving him a legacy that Frank had never asked for but had more than earned. My fingers tightened around the phone. I wanted to scream, to beg her to reconsider, but the words lodged in my throat. All I could manage was a broken, I see. Mom, please, she pleaded. You understand, right? I want to know him. Really know him. And I want my son to know him too. The innocence in her voice, the longing, it undid me. Emily had always been chasing something I couldn't give her, something Frank's love couldn't fill. Maybe it was the stories I had told her when she was young of how Michael had once been charming, how we had fallen in love too quickly, burned too brightly. I had thought I was giving her a fairy tale, not a roadmap to my own heartbreak. All right, I said finally, each syllable an effort. If that's what you need, I'll support you. Thank you, she breathed, the relief evident. It's going to be fine. I promise. But as the call ended, and I sat alone in our quiet kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a life built on sacrifice and love, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be fine again. I didn't sleep that night. Frank was still at the farm, tending to some late deliveries, completely unaware that his world was about to be shattered. My fingers itched to call Emily again, to beg her to reconsider. Instead, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation over and over. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my coat and headed to Emily's apartment. When she opened the door, she looked tired but radiant. Motherhood suited her. But I wasn't here to coo over my grandson. I was here to stop her from making a mistake she would regret. She sighed when she saw me. Mom, I knew you'd come. I stepped inside, inhaling the scent of baby powder and fresh laundry. We need to talk, I said firmly. Emily rolled her eyes and walked toward the kitchen, fixing herself a coffee with one hand while cradling the baby with the other. If this is about Michael, save it. I already made up my mind. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice calm. Emily, do you even realize what you're doing? Frank isn't my real father. The words cut like a knife. I took a sharp breath. He raised you. He loved you when Michael couldn't even be bothered to stay. Frank worked himself to the bone for you, and you're just... Emily turned to face me, an exasperated look on her face. And what do you want me to do, Mom? Pretend my real father doesn't exist just because Frank is what? A good man. A good man. I repeated, stunned. He worships you, Emily. That farm, the one you always turned your nose up at? He put your name on the shares. Half of it belongs to you now. Everything he built, he wanted it to be for you. Emily scoffed, shifting the baby in her arms. And what am I supposed to do with a poultry farm, Mom? Smell like chicken feed for the rest of my life? No thanks. My stomach twisted. Emily. She waved me off. I'm giving my shares to Michael. He'll manage everything and in return he'll just send me the profits. No more feathers, no more mess. Just money. Isn't that how things should be? I felt my knees go weak. You're giving the farm. I had to steady myself on the counter. To Michael. She shrugged. Why not? He's my father. My real father. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was spitting in the face of the man who had given everything for her. Emily, for God's sake, I pleaded, my voice breaking. Michael isn't who you think he is. He gave me this, she interrupted, her voice suddenly softer. I followed her gaze as she walked over to a shelf, reaching up to pull down something I hadn't seen in years. A doll. Not just any doll, the doll. The one she had clutched to her chest as a little girl, the one she used to talk to, tuck into bed, carry around like it was part of her soul. I swallowed hard. You still have that? Emily ran her fingers over the delicate lace of the doll's dress, a wistful look crossing her face. I was 6, she murmured. You told me we were just going to the park, but really we were going to meet him. Michael. I remembered. I had found his number, desperate for him to try to be in her life. He had agreed to meet, just once, just for an hour. He took me to that little toy store on Main Street, she continued. Told me I could pick anything I wanted. I picked her. She stroked the doll's hair. And for one day I had a dad who wanted to spoil me. Tears burned behind my eyes. Emily, that's not what being a father is. A father is the man who stays, who shows up every day. Not the one who buys you a doll and disappears for 20 years. She sighed. You don't understand, Mom. I've made my decision. Michael is my family and I want him in my life. In my son's life. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. If Frank's feelings get hurt, I'm sorry. But this isn't about him. I turned away, my hands trembling. I knew deep in my heart that this was a mistake. But nothing I said would change her mind. And when Frank found out, it would break him. Frank came home late, as usual. His jacket smelled of grain and warm feathers, his hands hanging at his sides, calloused from years of labor. I sat at the kitchen table, turning my teacup in my hands, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it from the doorway. Long day? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Frank sighed, pulling off his boots. Same as always. The new shipment came in late, had to stay and sort it out. You'd think after all these years I'd get used to the smell, but he chuckled tiredly. It still sticks, huh? I swallowed, gripping the cup tighter. Frank, we need to talk. He glanced up, wiping his hands on his worn-out jeans. He must have sensed something because his face shifted, the warmth in his eyes replaced by quiet concern. What is it? I opened my mouth, but the words got stuck in my throat. How could I say this? How could I tell him that the girl he loved more than anything, the girl he had sacrificed his entire life for, had just thrown it all away? That she had handed over his legacy, their future, to a man who had never lifted a single finger for her? I couldn't say it outright. So I started slow. It's about Emily, I murmured. That got his full attention. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. What about her? I took a shaky breath. She had the baby yesterday. Frank's face lit up, pure and unfiltered joy breaking through his exhaustion. She did? Why didn't she call me? I would have. He stopped, and I saw it then, the flicker of doubt. He sat back, rubbing his hands together. Wait, she didn't call me at all? I shook my head. His brows furrowed. Well, maybe she was just overwhelmed. First time mom and all. But he gave me a hopeful look. We can go see her tomorrow, right? I dropped my gaze. He went still. The silence between us stretched, and I felt my stomach twist. When were you planning to tell me? His voice was quiet, controlled, but there was an undercurrent of something dangerous in it. I forced myself to meet his eyes. She already invited someone else first. His expression didn't change at first. It was as if his mind couldn't process what I had just said. Then, ever so slowly, his face drained of color. Who? Michael, I whispered. The chair scraped against the floor as he abruptly stood up, his breathing ragged. No, he said, shaking his head. No, she wouldn't. She did, Frank. He turned away, pressing a hand to his face, as if trying to keep himself from falling apart. I could see his shoulders trembling. I wanted to reach for him to do something, anything, but I knew this was a wound too deep to be healed with a simple touch. She let him see the baby first? His voice cracked. Him. I nodded, my own throat burning. He let out a shuddering breath, then turned back to me. His face twisted in something between agony and fury. After everything? After all the birthdays, the sleepless nights, the college tuition, the first car, the hospital bills, everything. He gets to see my grandson first. I had never seen him like this. Frank was a quiet man, a patient man, the kind of man who swallowed his pain instead of letting it spill out. But this was breaking him. She says she wants to know him, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Frank let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Know him? He shook his head violently. What is there to know? That he left her? That he never cared? That he was gone when she needed him the most? His voice cracked and he clenched his fists. I was there. I was the one who held her when she cried. I was the one who... He stopped, his breathing sharp and unsteady. I could see the fight leaving him, draining out of his body like air from a punctured tire. And then, as if the blow wasn't enough, I forced myself to tell him the worst part. She named him after Michael. Everything in the room stilled. Frank blinked, his expression blank, like he hadn't heard me right. What? She named the baby Michael Jr., I choked out. He didn't move. He just stood there, frozen in place, his face void of any emotion. For a moment I thought he might collapse. Then slowly he exhaled through his nose, turned and walked to the sink. He gripped the edges of the counter so tightly his knuckles turned white. Frank, I whispered. He didn't look at me. I spent my whole life loving that girl, he said, his voice empty. I never asked for anything back. Not once. I swallowed. I know. He shook his head, letting out a shaky breath. But this? He finally turned, his eyes hollow. She could have stabbed me, and it wouldn't have hurt this much. Tears burned at the edges of my vision. Frank, please. He raised a hand, cutting me off. I get it now, he murmured. I finally get it. I frowned. Get what? A bitter smile curled at his lips. I was never really her father. I reached for him, desperate, but he stepped back. I'm going to bed, he muttered, his voice hoarse. I'll be out early for deliveries tomorrow. And just like that he walked out of the kitchen. I sat there, staring at the empty space where he had stood, my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. Because I knew deep down, something had just broken inside him that would never be fixed. The house felt different the next morning. Colder. Emptier. Frank was gone before sunrise. Normally, he would have left a note on the fridge or sent a quick text saying he'd be home late. But today, nothing. Just silence. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee I had poured for him, my fingers gripping the ceramic so tightly I thought it might crack. He hadn't spoken a single word to me before leaving, and deep down I knew why. Something inside him had broken last night. Emily called around noon. Hey Mom, she said, her voice light as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just torn a man's heart out of his chest. Are you coming by today? I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth. I don't know, Emily. Frank. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Frank didn't take it well. She sighed, exasperated. Mom, I don't get why this is such a big deal. I closed my eyes, rubbing my temple. Emily, you do get it. You just don't care. That's not fair, she snapped. I care. But it's my life. My child. And I have a right to decide who's in it. My grip on the phone tightened. You named your son after a man who abandoned you, and you let him be the first one to see that baby, while the man who raised you, who loved you more than anything, was left with nothing. My voice shook. Do you even realize what you've done? Silence. Then she scoffed. Mom, it's not like I owe Frank anything. I gasped. Emily. He chose to be in my life. No one forced him to. And it's not my fault if he got too attached. I felt sick. This was my daughter speaking. My daughter. The same little girl who used to run into Frank's arms when he came home from the farm, who used to fall asleep on his chest while he read her bedtime stories. And now she was talking about him like he was some disposable side character in her life. Emily, I said slowly, barely able to breathe. He signed the farm over to you. I expected hesitation. Maybe even guilt. Instead, she laughed. Oh, I know, she said. That's why I don't get why you're so worried. I'll be fine, Mom. I don't need Frank. Michael's handling everything now. I nearly dropped the phone. Michael? Emily, you're not serious. I already gave him the shares. He's officially part owner now. My vision blurred. You gave away Frank's life's work to Michael? She shrugged. Why not? What was I gonna do with a poultry farm? I covered my mouth, trying to hold back the tears. You have no idea what you've done, I whispered. Emily exhaled loudly like she was tired of the conversation. Mom, I have to go. Michael and I are discussing the next steps for the farm. Next steps? My stomach twisted. Yeah. He's thinking of selling. A cold, hollow silence filled the air. Selling. Selling the farm that Frank had spent his entire life building. The farm he had poured his blood, sweat, and soul into. Selling it like it was just some disposable asset. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Emily didn't seem to notice. Anyway, don't be dramatic, okay? She said lightly. I'll see you later. Then she hung up. I stood there, holding the phone to my ear long after the line went dead. And that's when I knew Frank wasn't coming back. Not really. He might still live in this house. He might still wake up every morning and go to work. But the man who had once loved Emily like she was his own blood? He was gone. And Emily, my selfish, reckless daughter, had destroyed him emotionally. Later that evening, Frank was in his office at the farm, staring blankly at the stacks of paperwork on his desk, when the door burst open. Michael. The man stood there, dressed too sharply for a place like this, his cologne too strong, his presence too entitled. He stepped inside like he already owned the place. We need to talk, Michael said, shutting the door behind him. Frank didn't move. Michael smirked. Emily already told you, right? I own half of this farm now. He leaned against the desk, looking down at Frank like a businessman surveying a weak opponent. But I don't want a farm. I want money. So let's make this easy, you buy me out. Frank let out a slow breath, his jaw tightening. And if I don't? Michael's smirk widened. Then I sell my share to the highest bidder. Could be a competitor. Could be a corporation that'll turn this place into a processing plant. Or maybe I just shut it all down. Either way, it's not my problem. Frank's fingers dug into the arms of his chair. This man, this stranger, was holding his entire life hostage. And Emily had handed him the keys. Michael leaned in closer. So what's it gonna be, old man? Frank didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled out his phone. Who are you calling? Michael frowned. Frank held the phone to his ear, his voice steady. My lawyer. Michael's smug expression faltered. Hey, let's not make this complicated. Frank ignored him. Jack? Yeah, it's me. I need a way out of a bad deal. Michael rolled his eyes, crossing his arms. You really think you can get out of this? Frank looked him dead in the eye, his voice firm. Watch me. Frank won. It took weeks of legal battles, but in the end, he found a way to take back what was his. His lawyer had dug through every loophole, every clause, and found the one thing Michael hadn't accounted for. Emily's stake in the farm had come with conditions. Conditions that stated she couldn't sell her shares without Frank's approval. Michael had bluffed, thinking Frank would just cave and hand over the money. But Frank called his bluff. And when it became clear that no one was willing to buy a share of a poultry farm with a legal lock on it, Michael had no choice but to sign his rights away. For nothing. He stormed out of Frank's office that day, humiliated, cursing Emily under his breath for giving him useless shares. But Frank barely heard him. He had his farm back. But it didn't feel like a victory. Because the one person he had built it for? She wasn't his anymore. Months later, Emily never thought it would turn out like this. She had been so sure that Michael would take care of everything, that he would provide her with an easy, comfortable life. But instead, he had vanished the moment he realized the farm was useless to him. No money. No legacy. Nothing. She was left with nothing. Frank had cut her off completely. No messages. No calls. Nothing. For the first few weeks, she had told herself he was just upset, that he would cool down eventually. That he would miss her. But he didn't. And slowly she began to realize something terrifying. Frank had never needed her. He had loved her, yes. But she had mistaken that love for dependence. She thought that no matter what she did, no matter how selfish or cruel she acted, he would always be there. Because he always had been. Until now. Now he was gone. And for the first time in her life, she was the one being left behind. The distance between us. I tried. God knows I tried. I called Frank every week, hoping that maybe this time he would pick up. That maybe we could just sit down and talk. That I could fix this. But every time it went straight to voicemail. When I did see him, briefly, in town, or when he came to pick something up from the house, he barely spoke to me. The love we had shared for years, the partnership, the life we had built together was gone. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't angry. He was just distant. And in a way that was worse. Because it meant he had already let go. A final attempt. Emily stood outside the farm, holding her son in her arms. She hadn't been here in months. The fields looked the same. The barn doors were open, the scent of hay and feathers thick in the air. It smelled exactly like she remembered. It smelled like home. For the first time, she regretted everything. She had traded something real for something temporary. She had thrown away the one person who had always loved her for a man who had left her the second things got difficult. And now she had nothing. Except this. This last attempt. Taking a shaky breath, she adjusted her son in her arms and knocked on the door. It took a moment before it opened. Frank stood there, looking at her with unreadable eyes. He had changed. He looked older, harder. There was no warmth left for her. For a moment she thought he might shut the door in her face. Instead, he just looked at her, his expression empty. "Frank," she whispered, her voice breaking. I wanted you to meet him." She shifted slightly, revealing the baby in her arms. Frank's eyes flickered to the child. But there was nothing. No emotion. No reaction. Emily's heart pounded. "Please," she pleaded, stepping forward. "He's your grandson. Don't you want to hold him?" Frank was silent for a long time. Then finally he exhaled. "I used to want a lot of things, Emily," he said quietly. "But not anymore." Tears welled in her eyes. "Frank, He shook his head. "I loved you like you were my own," he murmured, his voice thick with pain. "And I would have done anything for you." Emily swallowed hard, gripping the baby tighter. "You were my dad," she whispered. He let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "No," he said. "I wasn't." Then, without another word, he stepped back and closed the door. And this time, Emily was the one left standing in the cold. Alone. 1 year later. Frank. The farm was doing well, but it no longer felt like my entire life. I still worked hard, still took care of what I had built, but something inside me had changed. The divorce had been finalized a few months ago. There was no dramatic fight, no last-minute attempts to fix things. Just signatures on a piece of paper and the quiet acceptance that we had become strangers. I had spent years holding onto a family that was never really mine. Now I was finally learning what it meant to let go. Emily. I never thought I would end up with nothing. Michael was gone the second he had no use for me. My mother had pulled away, not out of anger but disappointment. And Frank? He had erased me from his life. For the first few months I thought he'd come around. That he'd miss me. But the truth was harder to accept. He didn't need me anymore. And for the first time in my life, I knew what it felt like to be abandoned. Her mother. Frank never looked back. I had tried a God, I had tried to fix things. I called, I visited, I tried to remind him of what we once had. But every time he stayed distant. The love was gone. Not in anger, not in resentment, just gone. And the worst part? I knew I had helped push him away. The final goodbye. One evening I drove past the farm and saw Frank standing outside, watching the sunset. For a moment I considered stopping. Maybe I could say something. Maybe I could fix something. But then he turned, walked to his truck, and drove off without hesitation, without looking back. And I knew deep in my bones he was never coming home again.